Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Board of Directors.
This meeting is being recorded.
Meeting for the Salton Sea Authority for this Thursday, April 27th. I would like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If we can have Director Santillanes lead us in the pledge. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Director. If we may have a roll call, please.
Chairman McCarthy,
Here.
Director Kelly, Director Kelly, Vice Chair Santillanes,
Here.
Director Cortez, Secretary Estrada,
Here.
Director Aguilar,
Here.
Treasurer Cardenas,
Good morning, President.
Director Dockstader,
Present.
Director Gutierrez.
President.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. This time we'll go on to the public comment section of our agenda. This public comment time is reserved for comments on any item that is not on today's agenda and it is not scheduled under Section 4. Any member of the public may address the board relating to any matter within the authority's jurisdiction and are invited to speak under Section 4 of the item is listed. Remarks shall be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes. We will entertain public comment both via Zoom. If you are on Zoom, please use the raise hand feature. You can do so on your phone by pressing star 9 to be acknowledged. When you speak, please state your name for the record prior to providing your comments. Please address the board through the chairperson. You may also email your comments in advance to info@saltonsea.com. Include your subject line, public comment 426 SSA board meeting. So before we go into public comment, I'd like to go ahead and extend a welcome to Ms. Samantha Arthur. She is our new Assistant Secretary for Salton Sea Policy with the California Natural Resources Agency. I do understand that she is joining us online today. Ms. Arthur, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me and for giving me the opportunity to, can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much for having me and for giving me the opportunity to join remotely and introduce myself. I'm Samantha Arthur, and I was appointed last month as Assistant Secretary for Salton Sea Policy, and I'm on my 4th day here in the position. So I'm excited to introduce myself and work with you all more closely on this really important initiative and caring for the state's role at the Salton Sea. Executive Director O'Dowd and I have a meeting scheduled for next week, so I'm looking forward to sitting down one-on-one and really getting the download on the Salton Sea Authority directly and participating in person and meeting you all in person in future meetings. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and on behalf of the authority, I'd like to welcome you and do look forward to working on many, many projects together as we move forward. Madam Clerk, I do not see any public comment that are for general from the cards that I have. Do we have anybody online?
Jasmine Phillips, you may speak.
Good morning, thank you. My name is Jasmine Phillips, and I'm with the Desert Shores Oversight Committee. I think it's important to remind you all that we are here and we're very willing to work with the Salton Sea Authority. We are excited about this project that was started 6 years ago with local residents and advocates working very hard to get it off the ground. The primary goals of the Desert Shores Channels Restoration Project are to restore 30 acres of aquatic habitat at the Desert Shores Marina by constructing an earthen berm and filling the channels with water that will also allow the marina to become functional once again. We want to work cooperatively with the authority while still maintaining an active involvement in the project. Therefore, it's very important to residents the project goes through the proper RFP process to give local contractors the opportunity to bid. The Residents and Oversight Committee are happy to support a successful RFP by spreading the word to responsible local contractors about the opportunity to bid for this project. We truly believe this is very important in order to elevate the local voices and concerns and to maintain the integrity of this local restoration project. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today.
Thank you. Next.
Michael Cohen?
Thank you. My name is Michael Cohen with the Pacific Institute. Mr. Chair, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to provide this public comment. Actually, a couple comments. One, I would like to request that in future meetings, the authority include regular updates on projects that it is leading, such as the North Lake Pilot Project, the New River Project, and its involvement with the Desert Shores Project, for example, and other projects that the Salton Authority is actually taking the lead on and has some financial responsibility for. And then my second comment is more of a question. I'm curious what the comments that the authority has prepared for the SSMP's annual report. I believe those comments are due on Monday. And I'm wondering if there's any discussion before this board, or if there's conversations, or if there's drafts being circulated among the board for the authority's comments on the annual report. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next person.
Nathan White? Nathan White?
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. This is Nathan White representing Ages Inc. Just want to congratulate the new appointment to the California Natural Resources Agency. Thanks for joining today. Excited that you're able to step into that position, and look forward to working with you as well. I had a couple questions, comments today. In my last comment period in the last meeting, I requested that the SSA provide information to the directive of if they are going to submit all projects that were in the California Natural Resources Agency review for both water importation and long-range planning, non-water importation, and recommend that all of those projects, not just the ones that were deemed feasible, be reviewed by the Army Corps of Engineers. So hopefully we can get a formal update or at least a response to that in this meeting or future meetings. I also would like to formally request if we can give a presentation for our water importation projects. We have potential investors that are ready to build projects in Mexico that could bring water within 7 miles of the U.S.-Mexico border. We'd like to share some of that information with the Salton Sea Authority as well as California Natural Resources Agency. Non-water importation plans as well, just commenting and seeing if those are being reviewed by a different group other than California Natural Resources Agency, or would that just be the Army Corps? I'm sorry, got muted. Or would that just be something that would occur through the Army Corps, or would that not be evaluated? So if anybody could give a little bit of direction on that, that would be greatly appreciated. The last comment and response is that our team is looking down the road to encourage investors to put projects into the Salton Sea as well as in Mexico. And is there a way that we could have a formal information exchange agreement with the Salton Sea Authority as new information comes in or requests come in, how we can communicate those, ideally in the fact of being able to do a QSA agreement by providing ocean water to supplement the old QSA and maybe a new one. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate everybody's help and commitment to the sea.
Thank you, Mr. White. Next comment.
Tom Sefton?
Mr. Salton, good morning.
Thanks for the opportunity to comment. I want to second the comments from Jasmine Phillips regarding the Desert Shores Channels Restoration Project. and add a reiteration that we would like to have a regular update at Salton Sea Authority meetings verbally, where the public can hear on the status of that project. And Michael Cohen made a good point that all projects, including this one where the Salton Sea Authority has a lead responsibility, should be reported out to the public on their status. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and also would like to welcome the new Assistant Secretary for Salton Sea Policy.
Thank you, Mr. Septon. Next comment?
No other comments, Mr.
No other comments? Do we have anybody here that failed to fill a card for public comment? Going twice? Gone. With that, we will move on to board member comments. This is an opportunity this is a time set aside for members of the board to share their thoughts, concerns regarding general authority matters not on the agenda. You can ask questions of staff and request that items be added to an agenda at a later date. The Brown Act expressly prohibits lengthy board meeting discussions on matters not on the agenda. The board may, at its own discretion by a 4/5 vote, add items deemed to be an emergency to the agenda in order to engage in public discussion. So with that, we're going to start here on chambers. We're going to go to my far left, and we're going to go ahead and start with Director Estrada.
I don't have a specific comment. I know that our general manager at CBWD circulated some information on a Salton Sea agreement. I need to digest that, but is that something that you're aware of, Patrick? And maybe we could just talk about it offline, but I need to digest it. I just don't know how it involves the Salton Sea Authority, if it does at all. But that's something that I need to talk to you about. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Director Estrada. Director Dockstader.
The only comment I wanted to make, and I can't remember now what it was called, but I did listen in on the Salton Sea, the informational session that they had last week on Zoom. So very interesting. Can't remember quite. What was it called, Patrick?
It's an update.
Some really good comments. Very informative. So thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Director Dockstader. Director Vice Chair Santillanes.
No comment.
Thank you. Director Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just had one comment and really one question. First, I wanted to extend also welcome to the Undersecretary on behalf of this board, as well as my role in the Coachella Valley Water District. I look forward to working with her on many good projects going forward. And then just quickly, I know we're not supposed to engage in dialogue during public comment, but to the questions or comments that were addressed by a couple of the members of the public, do we respond? Do we take that up at the next meeting? How do we how are we able to get the information that was requested, Patrick?
Thank you for the question, Director Aguilar. We do respond to all questions raised both by board members and the public at our meetings. In this particular instance, I intend to address it during my general manager's report at the end of the meeting. But more broadly, that there are activities taking place and there are plans for regularly scheduled discussions with respect to projects, not just the ones that the authority is responsible for, but for all projects. So we're developing that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair, if I could follow up with my kind of vague comment to Patrick. It looks like you were in that meeting, Patrick. It was relating to the Salton Sea Coordinating Committee, which it looks like you were a part of. And so that seems to have happened Tuesday. So in your comments, if you could just maybe brief us on what that call was about and what came out of it.
The quarterly meeting on the commitments agreement, I believe is what you're referring to.
It's a meeting that happened on the 25th.
Yeah.
Attendees were Reclamation,
Yep.
Mr. Wade Crowfoot, folks from IID, folks from the Authority, folks from BLM, Army Corps. So looks like you were at the meeting, so if you could just kind of brief us on what that was about.
I will do that.
Okay, thank you.
I do touch on it we do touch on it in item 4B.
4B?
Yeah.
Okay,
so
thank you.
We'll have that discussion.
Okay, we'll go on to directors online. Can you give me a hand? I'm not logged in, so I don't have a screen. We have no directors online at this time. All right, just to double check.
There's me, Gutierrez, but I don't have any comment.
Yeah, we do have directors online. They just haven't indicated a desire to speak.
Okay. Thank you, Director.
Good morning.
Gutierrez.
I do have a comment.
Oh, yeah, no, I recognize his voice right away. Director Cardenas, good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning. Do want to just add a comment and join in regards to the efforts and in regards to public comment. I believe there's a second request that's being made from folks regarding the project that we have lead positions on. So I am asking Mr. O'Dowd that he do or that he does address those public comments in his executive director report, and that we also maybe even consider having a project update information item just to keep people posted on the efforts that the Salton City Authority is making in getting these projects across the finish line. So just looking forward to us addressing those comments by people who are extremely passionate when it comes to the Salton Sea. And then also want to extend a warm welcome to Ms. Samantha Arthur as well, who was down visiting IID yesterday and fourth day on the job and is already making an impact. So we welcome her leadership and her passion to our efforts when it comes to the Salton Sea Authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cardenas. Do we have any other directors online that have logged in since we got started and would like to make a comment?
Not at this time.
Okay, being none, we will go on and start working on the agenda. Next item is agenda item 4A, items 1 through 5. This is the this is the consent calendar portion of our agenda. I will entertain first any comments from the public as it relates to consent agenda. Nothing there. Any questions or comments from members of this body? Being none, I will entertain motions for item 4A, items 1 through 5.
Mr. Chair, this is Alex Cardenas with the Bureau Irrigation District. I'm prepared to make a motion to approve the consent calendar as presented, items 1 through 5.
Thank you, Director Cardenas. We have a motion.
I will second.
We have a second. We have a motion by Director Cardenas, a second by Director Dockstetter. Is there any additional comment from members of this body? Being none, Madam Clerk, will you please do a roll call vote?
Chairman Plancarte,
Yes?
Director Kelly, Vice Chair Santillanes,
Yes.
Secretary Estrada,
Yes.
Director Aguilar,
Yes?
Treasurer Cardenas,
Yes.
Director Dockstader,
Yes.
Director Gutierrez.
Yes.
Motion has passed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We will now move on to agenda item 4B, Supplemental Environmental Impact Statement for Near-Term Colorado River Operations. Mr. O'Dowd?
Thank you, Mr. President. There is a memo in your board packet which discusses this issue in some length, providing some additional collateral material. The reason this information is being brought before you today, on April 11th, the Bureau of Reclamation released a draft supplemental environmental impact statement for the Colorado River with respect to the conservation measures that the commissioner indicated were necessary back last June. That, what they refer to as an SEIS, is subject to a public comment period. It's a 45-day period, and staff is seeking direction from the board to prepare comments in regards to that agreement. In addition to that, Ms. Moore is on the call also, and I do want to plug her in briefly, but what I wanted to say is what we do note in reviewing the document, among other things, is the Salton Sea is not discussed at all. The impacts to the sea are not discussed at all as part of that supplemental environmental impact statement. We were aware of that because when Ms. Jackie Gould visited us in January, she told us just that it was not included in the analysis. As you are aware, for some time we have been considering how we might evaluate those local impacts, considering that they're not being done under the SEIS. We have had discussions with an international engineering firm who's done work in this space. We have visited with the Bureau back in DC to see if they might allocate some funding to provide these types of analysis in lieu of what would be more conventionally considered a NEPA process, which we don't have time for, and everybody acknowledges that. But we wanted to make sure that the impacts to the sea and the surrounding communities were not ignored. We also received this month from the state the analytical details of their assessment of impacts from a 250,000 acre-foot transfer from the Imperial Irrigation District. That analysis showed that there would be an additional 6,000 to 8,000 additional acres of exposed playa based on certain assumptions. It's a very technical document, something that the authority staff does not have the capacity to really review. And frankly, we believe that for the benefit of the member agencies and the public generally, it should be subject to some independent analysis and support. I raised the issue at the meeting that Director Estrada mentioned briefly. It was originally called the Principals Level Work Group. Now it has another name that it goes by. There are a number of people who are involved in the conversation. It was originally focused specifically on the commitments agreement between IID, CVWD, the Department of Interior, and the state of California. But I think that having our second meeting, the participants recognized that the adjacencies couldn't be ignored. I did raise the issue, since we were directed to do so by the Bureau, that we felt that an independent assessment of the state's work was appropriate, and that Secretary Crowfoot indicated, and I want to make sure that that there was going to be. He said that basically he indicated that they were going to do the appropriate assessments, and that the necessary indemnifications would be put in place to get the actions implemented to create that conservation. But that they didn't feel at this time that an independent analysis of those impacts was necessary. He did agree, however, to have an offline conversation with us to further explore that. So what staff is recommending, as indicated in my memo, is to prepare and submit comments consistent with Ms. Moore's memo, highlighting the concerns and others that might be identified. And the second request that staff is making is to continue to pursue state and federal funding for an independent assessment of the impact to the sea and our communities for the potential conservation measures as contemplated by the SEIS, the commitment agreement, and in anticipation of future actions of the Colorado River and its water users that might impact the Salton Sea and region. And before I would receive your questions, I would invite Ms. Moore to chime in with anything she feels is appropriate.
Oh, sure. So we have a number of things kind of out there, right? We have the commitments agreement, which could be 250,000 acre feet of water. We then have a supplemental environmental impact statement that has two main proposals in it. One would be an equal cut of roughly 2 million acre feet across the lower basin. One would be a cut in accord with California's senior priority, which would impact California less significantly or later. So there's a question of what are the impacts of those two different alternatives. That document purports to cover 2024. Then Reclamation has indicated they intend to do a full environmental impact statement, a new environmental impact statement essentially for 2026 and beyond. So with all of these decisions, right, the question is for us, what are the environmental impacts of these different scenarios on the communities surrounding the Salton Sea and on the Salton Sea? And right, so we're halfway through 2023, which is what the commitments agreement in part is directed to. Looking at 2024 and this SEIS, the purpose of an environmental impact statement is really not to mandate a particular course of action by an agency, but rather to surface the environmental impacts of different alternatives that an agency might take, right? And so in the case of these two different main alternatives that Reclamation has put on the table, equal cut or California priority remains intact, right? There will be different environmental impacts associated with that, right? What the SEIS did, which is sort of a curious thing, is they did consider our region in it and the Salton Sea region, and they looked at the socioeconomic impacts that would occur to agriculture in an equal cut scenario. For environmental justice concerns, they considered the Imperial and Riverside counties, but only with respect to the metric of will those communities have water supply under these different scenarios. What Reclamation didn't evaluate is what the air and habitat impacts of the two different alternatives are. And so the purpose of NEPA really is just to surface what are those, because these two alternatives will look different if we consider air impacts, for example, to EJ communities, right? Because we have the Salton Sea, Arizona communities are not contending with that type of environmental challenge. And so when you ignore those salient environmental impacts to our communities, you deprive decision makers of really making a fully informed decision. NEPA also asked decision makers to consider what mitigation activities should be undertaken to mitigate unavoidable impacts. And an equal important part of NEPA is to really inform the public of what the different environmental pictures of these two different alternatives are. And so, so we don't really have a robust analysis in the context of the commitments agreement, which again is sort of the initial commitment that's on the table. We now don't have it in the context of, probably a pretty significantly larger potential cut to California in the case of an equal cut across the lower basin. We don't have it there. Will we have it in an EIS that looks at 2026 and beyond? It wouldn't seem so. And so I think what Patrick and the board has been talking about is where do we consider these impacts so that we really can understand, what needs to happen from a mitigation perspective. That enables us to go to the state, enables to go to the federal government to really to support those types of activities and really understand what we're doing. And so, that is not, again, this is a draft supplemental environmental impact statement. They're seeking comment. And so we can provide that comment. I would not expect in response to that we'll get a full-fledged sort of assessment of the impacts of those two different alternatives on our community. And so then the question becomes, how can we fund that and where can that important work, be done? And I think that's what the board seems pretty consistently on board at trying to figure out a way to fund an assessment like that. But that's sort of where we are. The other thing I'll just mention is a few days after the SEIS came out, the president announced a new executive order on environmental justice. All of the direction in that order really commits this administration to evaluating these impacts on our community, to look at the cumulative impacts of something like this across the board cut. And so, that order seems somewhat at odds with what is actually in the SEIS today, but I'll be happy to take any questions on this one. That's sort of my federal report too, I guess, all at once, but.
Yeah, I think that was good. And I did want to make sure that I quoted the secretary correctly. He said the state would be providing what he referred to as an appropriate indemnifications and securing the necessary environmental coverages to facilitate the objectives of the agreement. So I do think that the state is sincere in their attempt to mitigate the impacts associated with that. And I do believe that, their efforts are directed towards providing responsible actions necessary to do that. But the question is, because the state is responsible for funding the work, assessing the work, and implementing the work, is that good enough?
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. We will now go on to public comment on this particular item. I do have a request to speak from Greg Wilkinson on this item. Good morning, Mr. Wilkinson. If you will come up to the microphone so that those online can better hear you.
There we go. Thanks, Bob.
You could just have a seat if you'd like.
Oh, maybe I should sit over here. There we go. Can you hear me now? Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Greg Wilkinson. I'm appearing here today as a concerned citizen and resident of the Coachella Valley. I don't represent anyone other than myself and my wife, who has told me that if I wasn't here today, I'd probably be pushing a shopping cart aimlessly somewhere in the valley. I'm here to support the recommendation of Patrick's that comments be provided by you to the Bureau of Reclamation. But I would go one step, maybe two steps further than what Patrick has recommended. In the past, I have litigated a number of EIS challenges. And generally speaking, what happens is that these cases go to a court based upon the administrative record. And they are tried by the court based upon cross motions for summary judgment. There is no trial in the sense of calling witnesses, cross-examining witnesses, and so forth. What they are based on is the administrative record, and has been explained by Patrick and Ms. Moore. The administrative record through the EIS that's been developed is woefully deficient. In the 476 pages of that document, there's no reference to the Salton Sea. There is no reference to the fact that the sea is maintained largely through return flows from IID and to some degree CVWD. I think that's just an outrage. There is also no reference to the endangered species that used to be following the Pacific Flyway, many of which no longer exist, but some still do. And I think Frank Ruiz will talk about that to some degree. So what's happening is that the record that is being prepared by Reclamation makes no reference to the Salton Sea, no reference to its dependence on the Colorado River, no reference to the endangered species that exist. Now, I'm not suggesting that this authority will be litigating this document, but I suspect that someone will be litigating the document. Maybe IID, maybe CVWD, maybe Metropolitan. And for them to do so adequately, there needs to be a record that they can base their claims on. This ain't it. And so I do support the notion that this authority provide comments. My suggestions are really in 5 parts, and I'll go through them pretty quickly. I would suggest that the authority direct the staff to provide comments and studies. That's in addition to simply providing comments. but also studies that are already in the authority's possession, that the principal source of inflow to the Salton Sea is from return flows from IID that originate as diversions from the Colorado River. Secondly, that the authority provide comments and studies already in its possession that show that further reductions in diversions from the Colorado River will affect adversely the Salton Sea. I believe you have those studies already in your possession, some of which have been commissioned by the authority, others of which have been done by reclamation in some instances, the state of California in some instances, and others. Third, I would recommend that the authority provide comments and studies already in its possession showing that the Salton Sea is part of the Pacific Flyway and that further reductions in Colorado River diversions will harm the use of the sea as part of that flyway by numerous bird species, including certain environmentally listed species. The Supreme Court ruled in 1997 that groups like this authority, groups like IID and CVWD have standing to sue the government for its violations of the Endangered Species Act. I argued that case before the Supreme Court, and I'm pleased to tell you that I got Justices Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg to actually agree with me. It didn't happen too often. It was a 9-0 decision against the Department of Justice. It's critically important that that issue be raised, and frankly, I think Lisa did a good job of summarizing for you the positions that the comments should be directed to, but I think her report is a little bit light on the Endangered Species Act. It's another source of comments, it's another source of argument that those who do take up the litigation path could follow if they choose to challenge this document, and I think it should be challenged. The fourth area that I think comments and studies that are already in the possession of this authority should be provided to reclamation involve the impact upon the human environment. This EIS is very light on that. And finally, I think there should be comments and also the provision of studies already in the possession of the authority that raise concerns about the public health issues that are well known now and apparently, again, ignored generally by reclamation, including the asthma impacts on those who live on the border of the sea. Those are the comments I have for you. I'd be happy to also take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkinson.
Thank you.
Okay, that's the only request for public comment I had. With that, I will bring it back to comment from members of this board. We'll start with in-house. Do we have any comments, questions?
Mr. President, we do have one public comment online.
Oh, we do. I apologize for not checking online.
Tom Sefton.
Mr. Septon, you're on.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment. A few weeks ago, I had shared my rough calculations of the impacts on the Salton Sea of this 250,000 acre-foot per year cut, and what the impact would be if that continued into the future. And looking at what's on the table now from Bureau of Reclamation, if there's not a 7-state agreement in the next couple of months, and if they choose the option that would set aside the traditional water rights that IID holds, that impact could be ongoing and severe. I think there is good reason to question the state's estimation of the impacts on the Salton Sea of reductions in Colorado River water to the Imperial Valley. And I think it is highly advisable for the Salton Sea Authority to find whatever funding is available and proceed as quickly as possible with an independent and reliable analysis of what those impacts would be. This is going to happen very quickly, so a very in-depth analysis may not be possible, but it is possible to estimate the impacts on hydrology, on exposure of playa, on increasing salinity of the sea, on concentration of that which is in the sea, on air quality impacts to the surrounding area. It is possible to get some rough estimates on that fairly quickly, and it is important that that be part of the overall analysis of environmental impacts of reductions in Colorado River flows to the Imperial Irrigation District. So that is clearly not adequately analyzed in the NEPA process that the federal government is undertaking, and it is very important that it be done. So I strongly support the Salton Sea Authority as a local representative body to do whatever is possible to get a good, independent, and as thorough as possible in a short time analysis of the impacts to the people and the wildlife and the environment that we all live in. Speaking as an Imperial Valley resident. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Septon. Next person online,
Nathan White.
Mr. White, you're on.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. I think this is a great comment. I'm going to second what the two other former presenters were talking about, and just discussing that the endangered species are not just pupfish, they're all of the birds, fish, and the people that live in that area. With further reductions to the region and increased conservation and fallowing, what we have along with the Salton Sea is that we're going to have a lot less evaporation in the basin, which might have a negative impact on the Colorado River Basin as a whole. So I think, like Mr. Septon just said, you know, an independent analysis of all of these conditions, real time, and I have to reiterate, real-time geospatial monitoring and review is critical in this region. That's kind of changing, but as every field that we fallow in the area due to conservation, we're creating less evaporation in the region. We're creating a difference in the microclimate. We're having a negative impact on the entirety of the Colorado River Basin. Inversely, if we refill the Salton Sea and don't have conservation measures, then we could add precipitation into the Colorado River Basin in a positive effect. So, you know, these endangered species are critical. There's two groups that we've reached out to that might be viable candidates for the Salton Sea Authority, Desert Research Institute, and another group called Earth System Solutions can provide regional climate modeling. And that's a really great tool to have not only real-time data, but also projected data as the sea recedes, what effect that's going to have on the whole local region, but also the whole basin. And those projections of water flow and decreased, you know, shoreline will have an effect. And more than that, it might have an effect on the geology. And we don't want to create an earthquake scenario here as the water is on the San Andreas. So, you know, these are critical items to include in an environmental analysis. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate all the help and the time for comment.
Thank you, sir. Any additional public comment online?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we will go ahead and bring it back to this body. Any comments from those here on Chambers?
I just had, I'll probably have the comments later, but I'm curious, Patrick, about the comment that the Secretary made regarding indemnification. And how does that relate at all to what we would recommend or not recommend? I don't really understand that that's intended to be something that would dissuade us from doing that. Can you just say more about that?
I don't want to read more into it than it is, but what my understanding of the transaction, if you will, is that in order to achieve the conservation measures, there are potential impacts to the agencies who are participating in those negotiations, right? In order to incentivize the agencies to participate, the state will be providing appropriate indemnifications from the impacts associated with that. But that doesn't mean that those impacts go away, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems, I mean, you know.
Good, I think so.
Anyway, yeah, I have that concern, so thank you.
Thank you, sir. Additional comments from this body? Just to remind us, for those of you participating online, don't forget to mute yourselves until you're either ready to speak or you are called upon. Thank you.
Chair, I have some comments.
Director Cardenas, good morning once again. Go ahead.
Good morning. First of all, I just appreciate all the efforts, the comments that were made, but also wanted to provide some assurances and comfort. Both myself and Director Dockstetter are working very diligently to ensure that the Salton Sea public health impacts related to any hydrology situations are being addressed. And those are, in regards to the Salton Sea, that is an absolute priority in terms of responding to the SCIS and baking in those public health potential hazards that are associated with hydrology impacts. So we want to ensure that that IID is taking a leadership role in making sure the federal government understands what those impacts are. So that is an absolute priority for the IID. Do express some disappointment that the Salton Sea was not in current SCIS, but does provide an opportunity for us to address those comments and provide some factual information on what potentially would be the impact. So we are going to work diligently to ensure that those comments and analysis are provided in that document. In addition, we are working very diligently in regards to hydrology situation with the Colorado River, and I'm in overall support of us providing comments, but do want to caution that based on the public comments that were made today, that everything we put into writing, it serves as an administrative record, as noted. My concern is that is 45 days enough time to appropriately respond with comments and analysis? I would like to see our executive director caucus with California Natural Resources and the other states and possibly consider an extension period so that we can come up with the appropriate analysis and the appropriate information. I'm very concerned that we've only been given a 45-day deadline to provide those comments. And that's something that I will defer to our state and federal lobbyists and the body of this board here in terms of us maybe making an ask for an extension in terms of the comment period. I believe that the Bureau of Reclamation wants to see a volunteer program, and if we make a request for an extension under the covenant that we are working with other agencies, provide the appropriate comments and analysis, that it may merit an extension to the comment period. And, you know, and so that's what I'm asking, that we potentially explore an extension period to the comment situation. So, and the premise behind that is because this is serving as an administrative record. So I believe there may be discussions already taking place about an extension period, and I believe the Salton Sea Authority should caucus with other stakeholders to determine if we should be exploring or joining those efforts if they're out there. I'm also asking that any comments that we make in regards to SEIS, that there is some sort of alignment with the other agencies, particular Imperial Irrigation District and the California Natural Resource Agency. So I don't want us working, or my preference would be that we do not work in a vacuum and that we work with other stakeholders and seek alignment when it comes to the impact of the hydrology situation in the Salton Sea. So again, overall, in support of us responding, but ask that we caucus with other agencies to determine if an extension is merited. And I also ask that we work with other agencies so that we can have alignment when it comes to our comments and addressing those possible impacts. Those are my comments and my suggestions, but overall in support of a response during this comment period.
Thank you, Director Cardenas. Any other comments from directors, either online or in chambers? Being none, then what we are looking for is direction, Mr. Odell?
Yes, Mr. President, there are
Okay, so
two separate requests that staff's made. One is to prepare and submit comments, and the other is to continue to pursue federal and state resources for an independent assessment.
Okay, and I think there may have been a third one requested to be added to one, and that is to request an extension.
Okay.
And I think this can be part of the same actions. And with that, I think if there is any additional
Chair?
comment. Yes, Mr. Cardenas?
Can I just get confirmation, or can I be provided some comfort that we will be reaching out to other agencies, stakeholders along the that are involved with the Salton, that we will be caucusing with them as we formulate comments to SCIS?
I'm not exactly clear what that would entail, but we certainly don't have any aversion to reaching out to other people who are commenting in this regard. We have had conversations with some of the different community groups, the environmental groups and the environmental justice groups, about where they're at in commenting and how they're commenting. We haven't compared notes, but we can invite that conversation to take place.
And if I may explore that further, Mr. O'Dowd, and I apologize for taking time, but this is very important, at least to me. I just need assurance, because our next meeting won't be until the end of May. And what would be the appropriate avenue to reach out to our EJ community, to reach out to some of the other Section 5 contractors, and to some of the state agencies like CRNA? Can you just give me some context on how that would work? Would you reach out to them directly and ask them kind of what their thoughts are, or are you talking about a stakeholder meeting? What would you anticipate happening in the next 30 days to ensure that there is engagement from local, state, and federal partners?
So that doesn't sound like anything we had contemplated. I know that many of those stakeholders are engaged in this meeting today. I will reach out to the state and certainly reach out to our other stakeholders to see how we might collaborate in this. But more typically, those comments are provided on a more discrete basis. To the extent we can align our comments or compare notes and make sure that we are covering the right issues and haven't overlooked any comments, we can do that. I don't know if Ms. Moore has any thoughts on that.
Hey, yeah, I think there's two, right? I think if it would be good, and maybe IID is in the best position to do this, to see if there is, or maybe CNRA, if there is any like wiggle room in the comment period. I mean, Reclamation can choose to do that. I don't know that they will, because obviously if we have more time, it makes, having some type of stakeholder meeting or airing of issues or something like that, if we have more time, it makes it a little bit easier to do what you're suggesting in a more robust way. I have in other cases prepared comments, and then a whole group of similarly aligned entities would sign on to those comments. So that could be a possibility here. And so if IID was going to really be doing an analysis of the different alternatives and what that might mean for playa exposure, and was going to kind of take on that responsibility of really trying to analyze what Reclamation has put on the table. I think just having a conversation about understanding who's doing what and how those things might be brought together in one set of comments. Or I've had other situations in an environmental impact statement or something like this where, each different entities take on a different piece of it. I think getting some feedback from Reclamation sooner rather than later of whether there is any ability to push that deadline back kind of gives us a little bit better sense of how much consultation we'll have time to do, I guess. But I'd be absolutely completely thrilled to be Alex talking to you guys about that. So, and anyone else who's interested, I very much appreciated the public comments before. I was an ESA lawyer, so I know all the ESA impacts. I was just trying to do a sort of short analysis of the SEIS, but that having the EJ communities and the public and having these comments, I think would make it stronger if we have the time for it. So maybe getting a read on the time question, early next week would be great, to see if the commissioner has any inclination to do that.
So the Salton Sea Authority is a 5-member agency, but it's also a very big table, and a lot of people everyone is welcome at this table to either contribute to our comments or to collaborate in making sure that our comments align to the best of our ability, and we will do that. We will reach out to all the stakeholders who are either considering or actually writing those letters, and make sure that to the extent that Ms. Moore's draft can be conformed in such a way that it can come from all of the various stakeholders, or that they at least have some sympathy between them, so that we're addressing the same points, or at least understand where we're different. But that's something that we can do. I think that the very discussion that we're having highlights, Director Cardenas, the challenge with the 45-day period. It's hardly time to even think about a response, much less to assemble a coalition of like-minded people to take a position in this regard, to advocate for what we believe is right.
Yeah, Mr. O'Dowd, I'm almost done, Mr. Chair, and that's exactly my point. If I'm hopeful that the Salton Sea Authority is going to reach out to the individual agencies and ask for their comments or share information in this effort. I just don't want us to work in a vacuum when it comes to this very important document that ultimately will serve as an administrative record. That is only my request, and with that, I do have that comfort in moving forward and supporting us providing comments and moving on to the next item. Thank you, Mr. O'Dowd. Thank you to staff.
And we will do that. And I would also ask that, to the extent that board members of those individual agencies can encourage their teams to collaborate with us and work with us on that. I think it will streamline that process.
Patrick, I just want to understand, we're going to proceed though to have, is it Lisa that's going to prepare the response? And then is this going to be sort of a simultaneous track? We're going to be reaching out or notifying folks, or however we want to do it. I'm just concerned about, you have so much going on your plate and on the authority's plate. We want to do a thorough job, and I particularly like some of the comments that Mr. Wilkinson made about referencing some of the studies. So, can you? What are the mechanics of getting the response done?
So I'll let Ms. Moore respond to that, although we have had conversations with Mr. Wilkinson and invited him to participate in our effort to the extent that our interests and our understandings align. I think that that will be extremely helpful. I'm very grateful for his attendance today and his interest in assisting. Obviously, his long professional career will help us in a way that we couldn't, solicit publicly. So I don't know if Ms. Moore has any additional thoughts on that.
Yeah. So the way I would usually go about this, if it makes sense to the directors, is I just put together a draft, right? Based on everything I've heard today and my own understanding of the document, which I've been through several times, and I think it's always better just to work off something, and then we can share it with I think things would have to happen regardless, right? Share it with the different member agencies, because it would be going in under the direction of the Salton Sea Authority, and people can provide comments to that. If something's wrong in them, fix it, that sort of thing. So my hope would be to do that. I don't want to put a deadline on myself just yet, but sooner rather than later, so there's enough time for that then process of reviewing, adding, subtracting, objecting, and then we kind of go from and there, and then at the end of the day, the hope is that that's at the very least, a unified position of this agency. I think it's having all of you would maybe try to have all of the member agencies kind of agree to a set of comments and then potentially take it to the EJ communities, the environmental communities, see if they want to sign. They could submit their own comments, but also sign on to these comments or that sort of thing. But that's how I would prepare a draft, share it with the directors, kind of internally get feedback on that, try to reach, a unified position for the agencies in this room, and then take direction on inviting others to join in on those comments. That could be a way of doing it. I don't know if Samantha knows if CNRA is planning to put comments in on the SEIS. I'm just sort of curious about that as well, but I don't know. Those are my thoughts. That's sort of how I've done something similar to this in the past.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
And we can certainly ask and will.
Mr. O'Dowd, one final just inquiry. Ms. Lisa, who should be signing this document? If we present a document and provide comments that are going to be subject to administrative record, who should be signing this document? And Mr. O'Dowd, are you going to be canvassing from this board as far as whose ultimate signature is going to appear on this? And I guess I'm not sure if it's going to be the executive director or if it's going to be the president and chair and vice chair. Maybe I'll make the inquiry first to Ms. Lisa Moore in terms of who is going to be signing this document, and do you have any suggestions?
I personally like it when the directors all sign documents like this. Sort of makes clear that everybody's on board. So I don't think there's kind of a legal question with whether, maybe Mr. Wilkinson has a thought about this, but I don't think it, from a legal perspective, having Patrick sign it solo would be a problem. I just think that something like this, just to sort of show the kind of unanimity of opinion, is good to have all of the directors sign it. I think it's more impactful that way, but I think either could be the case. I don't think there's a legal problem with doing it one way or the other.
And I think before
we go down,
and I think before we would go ahead.
There's a suggestion from Ms. Moore that all directors should sign this. So is that what you're asking? Do you want to bake that into the direction that you're seeking here today?
So in order to accomplish that, we would have to call a special meeting of the board. We can deal with the staff of each agency to get their comments and where they're at and consolidate those comments. But in order for us to respond with the signatures of all board members, as with one of the subsequent agenda items, we would have to bring it before the board. And we could call a special board meeting with 24 hours notice to do that. We could either do it with all board members' signatures or with the signature of the president and vice president of the board. So we hold on.
So can I ask for a recommendation, Mr. O'Dowd, on what your preference would be in terms of signing this document, hopefully prior to our next board meeting?
Director Cardenas, I was just reminded that the comments are due the day before our next board meeting. So if we
due the day after.
The day after our next board meeting. My apologies. And so we would be able to present to this board the final written comments for submission and include the signatures of all board members. If we will verify all of that information, and to the extent that it works, the plan would be to include the signatures of all board members on those comments.
Thank you, sir.
Any additional questions or comments from you? No? So I do have a question. Is there a way to circulate a draft among us so that on the next meeting, and this while meeting the Brown Act requirements, so that at our next meeting it would be a lot more just agreeance and signing instead of wordsmithing? So I don't want to spend a 3-4 hour session and have a room full of different organizations concerned that one thing got added or another thing didn't get added. And so I would like to be able to work on that before, so that when it's coming down for signature, it is 99% done.
What I would suggest would be that, you know, Salton Sea Authority staff work with agencies' staff to identify one person within the agency as the contact person. So communication will go from staff in the agency back to the Salton Sea Authority Board. To the extent that the individual agencies get their directors involved, that's up to them. But that way we kind of avoid, you know, kind of Brown Act kinds of issues. Actually, we can send a letter out to all of you without any problem. The problem becomes when there's communication back and forth amongst directors. That's where we really get into Brown Act issues, and it's kind of hard to choreograph, given the number of agencies involved. So I would suggest that we set up lines of communications through, you know, staff to staff, and then each agency can work with their directors. But certainly by the time you get to the board meeting on the 25th, I mean, you will have seen that letter, and hopefully your staff and everyone will be aligned on it. And we'll have time to work through whatever issues come up, because obviously we can't wordsmith, you know, at the last minute, and we're not going to have any, I mean, it's got to get done, right? Right. Hopefully we'll have a document, and we'll have to work through those issues, because obviously that document's not going to be done until you all take an action on it, let's say at the next meeting, and that action can't be predetermined, right? So we're going to have to, we'll work through it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rock-Hargreaves. Okay, so I think that does not change the direction given to Mr. O'Dell. So with that, we will move on to next item. Next item is agenda item 4C, bill packet review. Before we get started on that, then Mr. Hargreaves, today I'm going to ask you to kick in again on this and guide us through this. I am concerned that, especially during this season, we get hit with a lot of requests for letters of support, and whether it is for legislation, as we are in that season right now, or other times for projects that are going around our neighborhood. And I am concerned that we may have or come across eventually some time where an issue where we may perhaps have one of the agency members that it is taking a different legislative approach than what this organization is, or a project approach than what this organization is. So I was thinking, suggesting that we form an ad hoc committee representative of these organizations in order to very quickly come together and review these, because another tricky factor, I guess, of some of these requests of support or statements is that they come usually with a very short notice. We need to turn in this packet by such and such date. We need help, or we need this letter, you know, within 2 days, 3 days. And so how could we possibly form a representative group with it from this body that could answer to that without, and represent their starting agencies without having a violation of the Brown Act?
Okay, what we've done in the past is the authority has had a legislative platform. They've gone through a process and developed a legislative platform, and then to the extent that requests come in, you know, the request is considered in relation to the platform, and then someone makes that determination. You know, given the time constraints and the number of agencies and the number of potential different positions, it's, you know, it's kind of tough to get everybody on the same page in a timely manner. And so typically what has happened is the authority hasn't responded to those requests unless it's something that, you know, it's pretty clear everybody agrees on. To the extent that there's disagreements, we've shied away from that. And the problem with having like a subcommittee is everybody's going to want to be on it, and then it's not a subcommittee, right? And if we've got every agency there, and then we've got problems. So,
sounds like maybe the formation of a legislative committee would solve something like this.
it could if there was, agreement on who's going to be on that committee, right? And there's trust that that committee, if it's empowered to, take positions, is not going to be taking positions that other agencies aren't going to be happy with. At times in the past, there's been some pretty sharp disagreements on the board with respect to different issues. I'm not sensing that that's the case at this point.
It is not, it's just the abundance. If you notice the bill packet review here, we've got over half a dozen. And that just, as I was beginning to go through them and thinking of all the other agencies going through them, I thought, there's something we can do here to help streamline some of this. And so that's where that comes from.
What we could do, kind of like that comment letter, is just, you could empower a subcommittee to take actions on behalf of the full board, send the legislation out to the different agencies, so the staff invite comments, and to the extent that there's consensus, then authorize the subcommittee to move forward. To the extent that there's any real disagreement, the subcommittee is just not authorized. We'll have to figure out how to make sure that we're not violating the Brown Act in that process, but I think that's doable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Mr. O'Donnell, any comments on that concept?
I understand the problem, and I'm confident that there is a solution. I do think that some of it could be operational. Some of it could be addressing during this legislative season, having as board president, you can call a special meeting with 24 hours notice. So to the extent that any of this is moving at a pace that doesn't conform to our board meetings, we could circulate the legislative information to the board members, call a special meeting. It wouldn't take a large number of board members to respond to requests for support or opposition to these bills. And what that would allow for is a time for any member or any member agency to react to the position that's being recommended by staff. Anything that's would come up as in SB 583, where we're looking for board direction. I would think that would be something we would want a more deliberative conversation on, but most of them are in line with our policy principles, and the positions that we're recommending seem to be logical from our perspective, subject to things that we might not be aware of from any individual member agency.
And that's what concerns me, the subject to anything we're not aware of. So,
and that would flush out through a special meeting.
Sure. So it sounds like there is a way of working through this. So I'll go ahead and meet with both of you and figure out a way to do this. And maybe we can come up with a process or procedure that then we can share with the entire body. And then if we agree on that, we can move forward and help streamline that, which is extremely helpful at times, as right now with this legislative. So thank you for that. So with that, we will go on then to our bill packet review, item 4C on today's agenda. And Mr. O'Dowd, who's going to be walking us through this one?
So I do have our Sacramento advocate, Mr. Horacio Gonzalez, is joining us this morning. And I'm going to throw him a little bit of a curveball, because what I would like to do for the purpose of our conversation is to look at SB 867 and AB 1567 together. What those two bills are the bond legislation. And what I'd like Mr. Gonzalez to do is to describe specifically what they are, where they're at, and how the Salton Sea Authority is being treated within each. And then I'd like to provide some thoughts, if that makes sense.
Sure. Director, it's good to see everybody. Great discussion. As you all recall, the governor called for the introduction of a bond in January as part of his budget presentation. Specifically, he was trying to secure resources for programs that he was having to cut as a result of things getting murky, to say the least, as it relates to the state budget, and at the time facing about a $23 billion deficit. So upon making that announcement, Mr. Garcia kind of started right out the door and introduced the assembly version of that bond, which is 1567, AB 1567. It's a $15.1 billion bond proposal. And within that bond, Mr. Garcia, out the door, proposed a $240 million investment in the Salton Sea, with $30 million being directed at the authority. The Senate also has a version of the bond. They had introduced it as a spot bill, but about a week and a half ago, the Senate moved to amend substantive language into that bond. It is now a $15.5 billion bond proposal, but unlike Mr. Garcia's proposal, they only allocate $100 million to the Salton Sea. Initially, staff, we had been recommending that our position as the authority should be to advocate for a minimum $500 million investment in the Salton Sea, with $50 million going towards the Salton Sea Authority. Since then, of course, things change, especially with the Senate introducing their bond and only starting at $100 million. The way that this typically works out in process is that the final number is a negotiation between the Senate and the Assembly, and the likelihood of us being able to move the conversation towards $500 million when the Assembly's at $240 and the Senate's at $100, it just becomes more difficult. So tactically, we should think about how we want to approach this. Does it make more sense, for example, for us to potentially get in line with Mr. Garcia's proposal as the bare minimum that we would like to see reflected in the final bond, which would be $240 and $30 towards the Salton Sea? Or do we just want to, kind of be aspirational and shoot for the 500? And it's certainly one of those items that, given Mr. Blancarte's earlier comments, certainly deserves conversation. Both of these proposals are moving through the process. They have both been passed by their respective policy committees. They are now before their respective appropriations committees. The appropriations committees will be meeting on the 17th of May to dispense with what's known as a suspense calendar. And on that day, we will find out if these measures are being released to a vote of the full body in both the Senate and the Assembly. But for right now, they're done having hearings, and it's really now kind of incumbent on the Appropriations Committee to make a decision. But those are the two measures.
So with that information, the $500 million is not just some number that we grabbed out of whole cloth or thin air. The state has a budget for their SSMP, and there's a hole in that budget. The state also committed to fund $240 million to the Salton Sea over the course of 3 years, which they did $50 million the first year, $100 million this year, and we were anticipating in the original budget $80 million for the remainder of this year. I think that there is some high concern that $80 million might be at risk at some level. And the thinking is that twofold. One is that the bond will pick up some of that money, and the other is that the contributions from the commitments agreement might pick up some of that money. There's an initial contribution of $20 million in the commitment agreement, which is for SSMP work, but it should be in addition to, not in replacement of, state commitments to do the SSMP work or the QSA work, what I would say. So I think that the $500 million that we had initially thought was reasonable is supported both by the hole in the budget for SSMP work, but also because the feasibility study is going to come up with an overarching plan for the sea, which is going to facilitate a 65% federal funding for that project, which will be in the billions of dollars. And the state will have to come up with from somewhere, either from general funds or through some bond implement to meet their matching obligations. Failing to do so will slow slow that project and slow the work at the sea. So we felt that the $500 million was supported by what we saw prospectively. It'll take 2 years to get the bond approved through the legislature and on the ballot and approved. So it'll be 3 years out anyway before that. And then it'll be, you know, if history is a precedent, it'll be 6 years before the next bond issue comes down the pike. So we're talking, as a practical matter, 9 years down the road before this opportunity presents itself again. Having said all of that, staff wants to consider the comments that were provided by the Assembly member and the staff and others, and look to support and amend Assembly Member Garcia's bill, continuing to advocate for more resources under that bond for the reasons that I articulated, and still take the position to oppose unless amend the Senate version of that bill, but use as a baseline number the number that's in the Garcia bill. I think that's reasonable. I think that the Assembly member would find that favorable. We don't want to be in opposition to any of our delegation, but we do need the support, and this is going to require resources for the state. This is not a gift from the state. This is the state honoring its commitment under the QSA, which it made 20 years ago, and it's behind on. So with that, I'll entertain any questions.
Chair. Go ahead, sir.
Chair, may I make an inquiry?
Mr. Cardenas, we have one here in chambers just before. You'll be right next after that.
So, thank you for that. That makes sense. I guess as I was hearing your conversation and you were talking about how there's budget that's been programmed as part of the SSMP that sounds like might be at jeopardy. I think you said 80 million. Is it your experience that the revenue that the SSMP depends on to meet its obligations, to do its projects, that those revenues in general come out of bonds, or is there another source of revenue that the department, I imagine it's natural resources, I imagine they get some sort of budget, yearly budget. So this money is intended to go to SSMP projects, or is that the way they propose to fund the SSMP?
Through the bond?
Through the bonds?
That's correct. So the commitment under the QSA is a general obligation of the state, right? They committed to restoring the sea. And they have a 10-year plan pursuant to the Water Board order to accomplish certain objectives.
Yeah, I get that.
And how they fund it is a framework of how the state treasurer finds the money to do it.
So my question is, there hasn't been any other revenue other than bonds that have gone to the funding of these projects?
No, the 240 million that was committed, the 50 million last year and the 100 million this year, have all been funded out of the general fund. The state was operating at a surplus. There was originally going to be a bond issue a couple of years ago, but because the state was operating in a surplus, they didn't feel it was appropriate to do that at the time and started funding it out of the general fund. And again, I'm not in a position to say what the state will or won't do in its current year's budget, but there is some high sensitivity to the fact that there's going to be across the board.
They're going to cut programs. So I'm just trying to get a sense, if absent this bond, does that mean there's no budget for SSMP? And you're saying, I don't know. The state needs to decide that.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
I don't know if.
But you provided an answer, and I think it's fair. You said, in the past, the state, through its general fund, has budgeted SSMP programs,
as well as Prop 68 and Prop 50 and others. So it's a question of how they fund their administrative burden.
Do you have a sense if there's any remaining? I mean, sometimes these bond dollars, they carry over multiple years. So do you have any sense of if we received funding from, whether it was the general fund, or it was through other bonds like Prop 68 or whatever prop it was, that all those buckets have been depleted?
They've been committed. Prop 68 is the SSMP and the North Lake project, which has money in it, but that money's going to get spent and then some, and then there's $10 million in that bond for the New River project. So they haven't been spent, but they're committed, which is why part of the challenge is they've got this big bucket of cash hung up on their balance sheet, but it's all project committed, right? So it does inform the conversation in somewhat of a negative way.
So you have three scenarios. I think I heard you say you had the scenario on the Senate side is 100 million.
That's what's on the table right now.
That's what's on the table right now. You have on the Assembly side 240 plus 30.
No, 240,
210?
including 30
210
to
plus
the Salton
30?
Sea Authority,
Okay.
plus $2 million for a community benefit to be determined by a group that would come together and decide
So
how to.
almost 500?
No, it's a total of 240 million.
Okay, 240. So
That's it.
100, 240, and then
100 or 240.
100 or 240, and then the other idea is, do we ask for 500?
240 or more.
240 or more. Okay. And your recommendation is that at a minimum we set the bar on the Assembly bill. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I agree. Thank you.
You get that right, Horacio?
Absolutely. Yes, that's exactly it. And I think to your point, Patrick, we can continue to advocate for more dollars, even in showing up in support of Mr. Garcia's legislation. It is always an opportunity to continue to make the point that, hey, the SSMP is underfunded. I think it's by about 41% of what it's going to cost. I mean, there's definitely a need for more dollars, and you can continue to make that point. It's just it's important, especially as the Assembly member starts engaging in these very tense conversations with the Senate, for him to be able to say that he has the support of his locals for at least that bare minimum ask. Obviously, if he can get more, he'll go for it. I feel pretty confident about that. But there is value in him being able to demonstrate, to represent, that his locals are in support of his ask as that bare minimum.
Thank you. Director Cardenas?
Yeah, so, Mr. O'Dowd, just for clarity, I just need a recommendation in regards to AB 1567. What is your recommendation for AB 167? And then I would also ask, are you looking for a motion in regards to that particular bill?
Thank you, Director Cardenas. On SB 867, we are looking for a motion. We are requesting that the authority take the position to impose, unless amended, to include a minimum investment of the $240 million, which is included in the Garcia bill, which specifically includes $30 million for the Salton Sea Authority. And again, the money doesn't come to the Salton Sea Authority; those are project dollars. And so that would be an oppose unless it's amended to reflect that. And in the Garcia bill, instead of saying support if amended, it should say support and amended. And the amendment would be to increase the amount. So we would continue to advocate.
Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to make a motion on AB 1567.
Okay, do we need to take these in order, which they show on the agenda or not? Okay.
That's really up to the chair. As long as no one objects, you can take them in whatever order is convenient.
Okay, do we have any additional questions from members of this body?
No.
Do we have public comment?
A second.
Not at this time.
Okay, being none, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second on AB 1567. Madam Clerk, please take a roll call vote.
Chairman Plancarte?
Yes.
Director Kelly? Vice Chair Santillanes?
Yes.
Director Tortes?
Kelly, yes.
Kelly just chimed in, yes.
Secretary Estrada?
Yes.
Director Aguilar?
Yes.
Treasurer Cardenas?
Yes.
Director Dockstader?
Yes.
Director Gutierrez? Motion has passed.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Chair, may I make an inquiry?
Go ahead, Mr. Cardenas.
Yes, in regards to SB 867, just for clarity, what you're asking, Mr. O'Dowd, is that your recommendation is to oppose the bill unless amended. Is that correct?
That is correct, and the amendment would be to essentially reflect the Garcia bill.
If we took the position of support and amended, can you tell me why that does not work in regards to the position? Why we couldn't have a similar recommendation as we did for AB 1567? Could you walk
Sure.
me through that or unpack it for me one more time?
Sure, because what we're supporting is the $100 million threshold. And if we indicate a support at that level, how does that affect the perception or negotiations that are taking place on 1567, which is, again, the companion bill? So I think from our perspective, I hear what you're saying, $100 million is better than nothing. But what we're trying to do is to advocate for good policy. This is not good policy. The state has obligations to meet. They're choosing not to do it under the general fund. They're choosing to do it through this financing vehicle. And as a matter of policy, we believe that if we end up at $100 million, the interests of the community in the region are not being well served. We're just going to have to go find that money somewhere else. Obviously, they're going to do what they want to do, and I don't know that our opposition is necessarily going to keep it from doing what they want to do. But I do think that it's important for us to articulate our concerns with the bill. So if we indicate support, then it comes across as though we're in some form supportive of this. But that's staff's recommendation, and we act at the pleasure of the board.
I have no other comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cardenas. Going back to SB 867, do we have any recommendations, any comments, motions?
We could take no position.
Yeah, that's what it looks like we're going to do.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest in the interest of time that the next four bills, Mr. Gonzalez could briefly describe them, and if there's any concerns about those bills, we could answer them. If not, we could deal with them en masse.
Okay, just for the record also, we do have requests for comments on two of those items, okay. AB 827, as well as SB 583. So I am not opposed to that presentation being done that way. Just know that we'll have to include public comment at those points.
I would say SB 583 we probably want to deal with separately.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Gonzalez, go ahead.
Sure. So the next measure is AB 827. This would require the Department of Public Health to conduct a study of the pulmonary health of communities in the Salton Sea region. The measure was passed on consent from the Assembly Health Committee, which means it got unanimous support and is now before the Appropriations Committee. The next measure is AB 1593. This bill would establish the Equitable Access Program under the California Workforce Board to prioritize training and employment of residents in and around the Salton Sea area, with a real focus on the Lithium Valley and ensuring that the communities that are around the Salton Sea area benefit directly from that development. The measure was passed unanimously by the Assembly Labor Committee and is also now before the Assembly Appropriations Committee. The next measure over is AB 1569. It establishes the Lithium Development Office, the Lithium Valley Office of Development, for purposes of coordinating all the state's work related to the Lithium Valley. That measure was passed on consent from Assembly Utilities and is now before the Assembly Appropriations Committee. And the final bill in this batch is AB 1562. This is a measure that attempts to address a concern that emerged last year where Imperial and the Eastern Coachella Valley were not included within a single zone for purposes of the Community Economic Resilience Fund program. Imperial was included with San Diego, and Eastern Coachella Valley was included with San Bernardino and some of the more urban areas. And really what Mr. Garcia is trying to do here is to effectively create what amounts to an enterprise zone specific to the Salton Sea region. The bill is very much in development, but that is the goal of trying to incentivize development given the similarities of the communities that are on the Imperial side and the Eastern Coachella Valley side. That measure was passed out of the Jobs and Economic Development and the Economy Committee on Tuesday, and is also now before the Appropriations Committee. Our recommendation on all of those proposals is support.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. We'll bring it back to chambers. Any comments or questions from members of this body? Any questions from members online?
Not at this time.
Thank you. We do have a public comment request to speak by Mr. Chuck Tobin. That's here from chambers on item 2 AB 827. Mr. Tobin.
This one? Okay. Thank you. My name is Chuck Tobin, Salton Sea Action Committee. I'm here to speak on 827, which is Assemblymember Garcia's Salton Sea Community Health Study. At your last meeting, you had a presentation by Dr. David Lowe of the UCR School of Medicine. Dr. Lowe, the study proposed by Assemblymember Garcia would actually be the third step in his investigation of toxins from the Salton Sea. Dr. Lowe, the first step was to do a 5-year investigation of the playa dust and what was in the dust. Unfortunately, it's not good news. What he discovered was that in addition to the usual agricultural runoffs, that there was also microbial toxins that were being generated by the sea. That's unique. That's a very different outcome. So the second step, which he's conducting this year, is to look at how the sea generates these toxins, what's going on in the playa that creates the toxins. They're probably being created by a bacteria, but that's what he'll be investigating. Along with, he's starting this process of trying to look at the disbursement of asthma in the communities surrounding the sea. So he wants to get a better understanding of what the density is of those who have asthma, and whether proximity, living closer to the sea, creates a higher level of asthma. This bill 827, which is basically the third step, would be to take all that previous investigation and do a full-blown epidemiological study, or a community health study. It is the Action Committee, we're very excited about the prospect of the third step, because we think it is well past time where we get a real understanding of what is the health impact of the toxins of the sea, and what can be done to help people who are living there with respect to those impacts. So this bill has already been supported by the local community health care providers, which is Intercare and the Borrego Health Services, because they are the ones who provide direct health services to people who live adjacent to the sea, and they see the need for this legislation. So again, we hope that your authority will also support this bill. We think it's an incredibly important next step in all that previous discussion you had this morning, because it will help to further drive home the need to provide the resources to mitigate everything that's going on there. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment online? Any hands raised?
Not at this time.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and bring it back to this body and entertain additional discussion or motions.
Chair, if there's no other discussion, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Go ahead, Mr. Cardenas.
I move that we follow staff's recommendation in support of AB 827, AB 1593, AB 1569, AB 1562. My motion is to offer a position of support according to staff's recommendation.
I second that.
We have a motion by Director Cardenas, a second by Director Dockstader. Please call for the vote. I am sorry, it came from this side. Okay, that was Director Santillanes. I was writing down and just heard a voice over the microphone. I apologize.
Mr. Chair, comment?
Go ahead, Mr. Kelly.
I am in support of the motion and agree with all these, all the bills that are being presented and discussed. I do want to make mention that the economic zone was directly came from the Lithium Valley Commission, and I know that I support it as is. I do know though that it also considered the Palo Verde Valley for consideration as well, and I know I will reach out to the Assembly member, but other entities for the Salton Sea Authority, that maybe you could take that into consideration as well.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Okay, with that, we have a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and do a roll call vote.
Chairman Plancarte,
Yes.
Director Kelly,
Yes.
Vice Chair Santillanes,
Yes.
Director Tortes, Secretary Estrada,
Yes.
Director Aguilar,
Yes.
Treasurer Cardenas,
Yes.
Director Dockstader,
Yes.
Director Gutierrez. Motion is passed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Going on to the next item on the agenda, SB 583, Salton Sea Conservancy.
Mr. President, this bill, authored by Senator Padilla, intends to create a conservancy for the Salton Sea with a number of responsibilities. The Salton Sea Authority, well, the staff, as a follow-up to conversations regarding how to address operations and maintenance of completed projects, the staff began exploring a number of options, one including a possible conservancy that could own and operate these properties, these projects, once they're developed with adequate funding sources that would help them to maintain those improvements when they're done. This piece of legislation goes far beyond that and deals with a number of things that we believe are in conflict with some of the works of the authority and the state agencies. We were contacted by the senator's staff and have had conversations with their office. I'm not going to say early on in the process. It was shortly before the bill was filed, and we did see the language shortly before it was published. But we expressed concerns, we expressed those concerns, and we felt that this is a conversation which would require a longer period of time to digest and reflect and respond to, so that to the extent that a conservancy is warranted, it's developed in such a way that it contributes to the success of the efforts that are ongoing and doesn't create conflicts. Some of the conflicts that I see, one is just simply the confusion that it might lend to the effort that's taking place on the feasibility study, which is a 3-year planning exercise. I also am concerned about how it will influence the conversations taking place on the Colorado River and our efforts to advocate for proper analysis and protections for that. I believe that the people, that the groups that are in support of this are our regional stakeholders, and I believe that they're sincere in wanting to get things done. And this is a forum, as I all too often say, this is a forum right here where a lot of that can happen. Regardless, I do think that it's going to take some time to figure out how to responsibly implement a conservancy, if at all. So staff has drafted a letter to the senator requesting that this be made a 2-year bill, and we are recommending that this board authorize the sending of that letter.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from members of this body?
I don't have questions. I have some general comments, but I can go after if someone has questions.
I do have an inquiry if afforded an opportunity to make that. Sure.
Go ahead, Mr. Cardenas.
Mr. O'Dowd, what's before this board today is the approval of the letter that was provided. Is that the direction you're seeking today?
I didn't quite understand the question.
Sorry, let me try again. What I believe I heard you say is that you're requesting from this board approval to send the letter, Senator Padilla, regarding the Salton Sea Conservancy and request for a delay and deliberative engagement.
Yes, there's a draft of a letter in the board packet.
Okay, so you're not asking for a position on the bill. You're just asking for authorization to send the letter. Is that correct?
So that is correct. It would be the position. It would be our recommendation that would the delay not be granted. That's a good comment. And that would the delay not be granted, that we would oppose the bill.
So that's one option.
So that's an option.
Okay.
So the option could be that we send the letter but not take a position today, correct?
One option would be to support the bill. One option would be to oppose the bill. I think that there are a number of options to consider. This is moving, through the legislative process apace, and I think the sooner we get on record with our position, the better. But yes.
Is an option to watch the bill and submit the letter?
Well, I think the letter would either support or not support. Watch would be not sending a letter.
I think the question would be what, and I don't know that the board has to take a position on it today, how it would respond if the senator viewed our request disfavorably.
I think we have to come to an agreement today of what we're going to do based on how the senator reacts. And so there's a number of options that we can take, and I think that's why we're having the conversation. I think you're presenting a recommendation, and I think we're going to have dialogue to either come to consensus that that's what we're going to do, or out of the conversation we're going to do something else. Is that fair?
That's correct. I think it's fair to say that we're concerned about the bill. We're concerned about the pace at which it's moving forward. We're concerned about public perception of what this conservancy is or isn't. If it's even created in law this year, it'll be funded by monies which have been allocated. It's $15 million in the new bond document, $15 million for the creation of the conservancy. So those monies wouldn't be available likely until 2025 anyway. So if you put this law on the books today, the monies that would be made available for the creation of that conservancy wouldn't be made available until after the bonds are sold. So I think that there is, there's no good argument in my mind to rush this. And there's every good argument to at least delay it, if not take a step back and start over.
Yeah, and I have some general comments on my personal feelings about it that maybe I should express, and then maybe others can express their own comments. But I'll start. Sounds like we need to have a conversation, so.
And just so you know, we do have 2 requests for public comment, and so you can start your comments before or after that, just so you know that they are out there.
Okay, I'll start them before. So I expressed concerns the last time we were here, similar to everything that you just expressed. The way this bill seems to be moving along, to me, it doesn't appear that there's been a lot of communication either with Salton Sea Authority or with its member agencies. I certainly haven't heard a lot about it. I know that in our own legislative committee at CBWD, we try to get a sense of it. It was somewhat vague. We sent staff to try to make contact. I think there was some contact that was made. Maybe we got a chance to express our concerns, but I certainly haven't heard that there's been an opportunity for us to have a conversation about them. So everything you said is right. I think that for me, the concern is related to what this bill, the implementation of this conservancy, what it would mean for this body, what it would mean for the work that we're already doing, the work that we plan to do. How does that embed into an already very complex situation? And does this only further complicate things, or does it make them better? The way I read the bill, I don't really see anything that's new other than the fact that it attempts to create some sort of revenue stream, which I think is positive. But other than that, it seems to be created to do a lot of what this body was created to do 30 years ago. I know that something that we've struggled with, at least since I've been here, and again, this body has been here for 30 years, but something that we've struggled with is the fact that we don't have a revenue source. So if the problem is, let's try to figure out a way to create a revenue source so that we could do more, I just don't understand why this body is not adequate to become the governing structure of this proposed conservancy. And if it's not going to be this body, then what is this body for moving forward? And then what does that mean to all the work that we're doing as this body? What does that mean? It creates a lot of confusion. I'm confused right now. And I think that's enough reason to, at minimum, ask that this bill be slowed down, and also be prepared to, just straight out oppose it if we feel that we're not getting any clear indication that it is going to slow down. Again, I think that puts us in a weird spot because things move fast. And so the other thing that we need to consider is, do we even have the luxury at this point to try to say slow down, or do we need to oppose this bill now? Because I think this bill is going to appropriations. I don't know if that's May 17th. I think I heard Horacio throw out a date. I don't know if that, May 17th is around the corner. So if this is a real issue for us, I think we need to convey that. And it may be that the only way to do that is to oppose the bill. And so those are just, my personal comments and kind of the way I feel about this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Estrada. Any additional comments from the dais? Directors online?
I do agree with Director Estrada. Those are some of the same concerns that came up when it was presented to Tribal Council of Torres Martinez, and how it would affect the Salton Sea Authority Board, and also the concerns of what I read through the bill. I agree with what you're saying, Those are my same concerns as I read through it. And why couldn't the Salton Sea Authority Board be that revenue stream? And it does seem like it does duplicate what this board was created to do. So I agree.
Comments?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. One is that I'm very much in favor of securing additional resources for the authority to get the job done in any way that we can, but I'm not sure that this bill does that. And I sat in, as probably most of you did, on the committee hearing, and Assemblyman Dahl, I thought was pretty eloquent when he spoke to concerns about the bill, and particularly its governance structure or lack thereof. And that causes great concern for me as well. I don't think taking the approach of tagging this to a 2-year bill is going to necessarily address the core problems that I have with it. And so I have kind of moved from the position originally of let's wait and see what happens to I think we should take a stand and oppose this and send a very strong message that it injures our ability to do our work.
Thank you. Any additional comments from the dais? On lines, directors?
If I may, Chair?
Go ahead, Director Cardenas.
Yes, I would just ask this body to consider the operations and maintenance discussion of the Salton Sea. And if that's a space that the Salton Sea Authority wants to consider being in. I believe the premise behind a conservancy does provide opportunities for operations and maintenance, provides also funding opportunities for operations and maintenance. I agree with all the comments that were made here today, but what I am concerned about is O&M. And as we look at these projects, there needs to be an authority behind the operations and maintenance, and it's not going to be the IID, I guarantee you that. We just don't have the balance sheet to sustain that O&M discussion. I think, again, the premise of a conservancy provides that opportunity. I'm not advocating for a support of the bill. I can tell you that IID has taken a watch position, and the reason for the watch position is to allow for that operations and maintenance discussion to take place. And but that is going to be a challenge for the C in the future. It's capital and operations and maintenance. So I know that both Director Dockstetter and I have adopted positions of watch under the IID hat that we wear. And so I'm somewhat conflicted in terms of offering a position here today of this Senate bill. I am in support and signed off of the letter that was drafted by Mr. O'Dowd, and I think it does provide an opportunity for that conversation to continue. So in summary, I'm just asking this board to consider the operations and maintenance discussion of the Salton Sea and how a conservancy could fit into that. But at this point in time, I cannot support an opposition to the bill because of the position that we took on our IID board of a watch position, but in support of the comments that were drafted by Mr. O'Dowd.
Thank you, Director Cardenas.
And I would like to say that I do concur with Director Cardenas. I also signed off on the letter. I agree the redundancy between the Conservancy and the Salton Sea Authority. We don't need that. However, I am also concerned about the O&M. And I still think that if we watched it, if we pushed to 2-year, we could still have that dialogue, still have more input. So that's my position on that.
Yeah.
So, you know.
And I would say that O&M is an issue that the authority has focused on, and there is a right way to do that. And I think Ms. Moore has been involved in other projects where the conservancies were created to take on these assets. They typically are implemented at the end of the day when these projects start coming online, not at the beginning. If all we were having a conversation about today was O&M, this would be a fundamentally different conversation. But what this organization intends to create is a fairly significant public agency which would largely take on the responsibilities that are now being administered by the Department of Water Resources, by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and otherwise. They're creating a behemoth agency that's gonna shuffle the deck of everything that's going on right now. And so there is a conversation about how do we deal with O&M. That's an issue that Riverside County is highly sensitive to on the North Lake project. IID is no doubt sensitive to on all of the lands that it owns and are being developed as projects. But I'm unconvinced that this piece of legislation is the only venue where that conversation can take place.
Thank you, Mr. O'Dell.
And yeah, I'm not opposed to a revenue stream for O&M. I just don't understand why that revenue would have to go to an entirely new body to accomplish. I might be wrong, but I can see an option being this body changes its name, or I don't know, a modification of a name, and take, you know, it's no different. So that's the way I see it. You know, we certainly do need the O&M revenue. I just don't see why we need an entirely different group of people to accomplish that.
You know, the ideas with respect to O&M, Director Hanks suggested that, you know, resources from the power generation of Hoover Dam could be used to fund O&M for this project. There's a wide array of concepts, ideas, and options for dealing with that. And I think that this authority has been part of those conversations for years, and hopefully it will continue to do so.
Okay, Madam Clerk, do we have any directors online expressing intent to make comments?
Not at this time.
Okay, do we have public comment request online?
Yes, Nathan White.
Okay, Mr. White, you're on.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm really interested in that subject. O&M has always been an issue with making projects sustainable. That was a question that we had last night when we were meeting with investors. You know, operation and maintenance is the biggest concern, but there are solutions that for any project could have that operation. But when they're projects that are habitat only, the operation and maintenance is much smaller and takes more work to cover because you only have potential tourism as part of the revenue stream. So what we've been looking at closely is a full restoration plan of the sea, which creates new opportunities for revenue generation that's not just tourism, but also includes real estate development taxing increases, as well as new industrial development and other things of that sort. So widening the bucket of funding sources that can be possible only comes with a full restoration project and plan. Other opportunities are, if there's a buyer for water, there is an opportunity to share O&M costs with a private entity. And so those are discussions. That was my first comment earlier today, is how do we have those information exchanges with an agency like the Salton Sea Authority or California Natural Resources Agency, because we can provide water and also as a private developer cover all of the O&M ourselves, so long as we have somebody that's willing to purchase dust mitigation water or have a water kind of transfer agreement. So, you know, development scope at a larger scale offers more opportunities for income generation and coverage of O&M expenses. But the big question that I have is the Salton Sea Authority, we have money in the bank already. Where is that money going? how is the review process going? Is there a new review body internal to the Salton Sea that would allocate those funds? Because that process has been what we've been hoping for Desert Shores, for other projects like Desert Shores around the Keys, for our personal South Lake project, or even water importation as a whole. So the process of how money is spent and where that money goes, and the process around Salton Sea Authority actually administering those funds and creating grant programs or application processes is my main point to that, because there is potential to cover O&M through private dust mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no additional online comments. We have one more.
Actually, Pat Cooper would like to speak.
But Pat Cooper is here in person,
Yes,
or?
yes.
Okay, no more online?
No more online.
Okay, so we will go now here to chambers. I have two. We'll start with Pat Cooper, and then we will go on to Mr. Frank Ruiz.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Directors. I'm Pat Cooper, Deputy Chief of Staff for Supervisor Perez. Unfortunately, he had to be in Sacramento today to attend the California Air Resources Board state meeting, CARB, and he asked me to relay his opposition to SB 583. He's had several conversations with locals concerned, as well as his own concern about the purpose of this bill. Supervisor Perez is troubled that a major governance structure would be considered and moved through the legislature through this process without consultation with our local communities or even support by our local Salton Sea Authority. This is why when he was in the Assembly, he authored AB 71, which required the state and lawmakers to consult with the locals. This is not our first time experiencing a lack of consultation and feedback from the locals. In 2010, my former boss, Senator Denise DuCheney, carried SB 51. This was the Salton Sea Restoration Council. The bill made it through the legislative process and got to the governor's desk. But there was heavy opposition by local groups, and they made that known to then Governor Brown. He ended up defunding the council, and the council went away and died. In 2018, Senator Ben Wesso carried a bill to create a Salton Sea Department, again with no local input. The locals opposed and the bill died. And so today we have SB 583, again with no consultation with the locals and no feedback on all of these concerns raised today, as well as many others. Supervisor Perez asks respectfully for the Salton Sea Authority to oppose SB 583. Oppose it, perhaps start again, where we can have some fruitful discussions as to what the purpose of this type of bill would be. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cooper. Mr. Frank Ruiz.
Thank you, Chair Percarte and the members of the board. My name is Frank Ruiz. I am the Salton Sea Program Director for Audubon, California, and a member of the Salton Sea Partnership as well that is composed of CBOs and NGOs. And my comments, today is to ask, the Salton Sea Authority to be dialectic about this bill. And I want to share my perspective as someone that is in the trenches of the second largest habitat restoration of the Salton Sea. I know the challenges, and I know how difficult it is to move things on the ground. And we may agree or disagree whether, the Conservancy can be the solution or not. But one thing that I think, we may agree is that the current system that we have is not conducive to implement projects on the ground at the speed that we need them. Almost 7 years ago when I joined Audubon, I was part of this documentary, and we interviewed a family of 5, mom, dad, and 3 kids, all suffering from respiratory problems. The kids at that time, 12, 9, and 6, they had to walk to school carrying an inhaler and a bronchodilator, because that's how most of those families in those communities live. We don't have the time. It took 15 years to break ground on the species conservation habitat. At this rate, and I share my perspective as someone that is in the trenches in habitat restoration, Audubon is leading the second largest habitat restoration just south of Bombay. And I don't think the Conservancy can be in opposition to what the Salton Authority does. If anything, it can complement the work. Director Ordal has indicated many times that the authority does not have the capacity to implement any projects on the ground. They have other strengths, but implementing projects on the ground is not one of them. We need a conservancy that can consolidate all the different entities working on the sea, that can secure money for O&M, which is a huge issue. Okay. So I encourage you, all members of the board, to work with Senator Padilla. And in the name of transparency, he has indicated that this is a 2-year bill. Enough time to bring the stakeholders support, have those dialectic conversation, understanding what are the common grounds, and making sure that the language that goes into the bill is a language that represents all of us as stakeholders, and that is fair and conducive, for implementing the projects that we badly need. Thank you, though. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Ruiz. Okay, being no additional public comments, we'll bring it back to this board.
I have a question for you, Patrick. So let's play the scenario where we send the letter. At what point do we think about opposing the bill? If we were to send the letter and didn't get the proper response that we were hoping for. I'm just trying to I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to be fair to the author. I'm trying to be fair to the process. I also don't want to put ourselves in a situation where unless we make a strong statement, we just kind of get ignored. And so I'm thinking if we say, okay, let's send the letter, let's ask this to be a 2-year bill, by when do we need to get some sort of feedback from the office that they're willing to accept our request?
So that's a process-driven question at one level, and I would defer to Horacio on that. I would also suggest that it's not just process, but public perception. So the longer this percolates in the public sphere, the more questions and confusions it will cause. But I think as a matter of process, I would ask Horacio, how long should we wait before we took a formal opposition position on this bill? And I don't know if you have an answer for that, Horacio.
Horacio, and if you could, my understanding is that this bill would move to appropriations, and so I would think that the author, senator, would pull the bill so that it didn't go to appropriations. And so maybe that's the indicator there. So can you kind of share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. So the bill is set to go before the Appropriations Committee. I believe it's next week. So ideally, we would want to have the author, at a minimum, postpone that hearing. And then, if he needs time to kind of consider the letter, then he can give us an indication of, will he make it a 2-year bill? But to answer your question directly, I mean, we know if it is a 2-year bill, if they stop moving it. And, if the bill does go before the suspense committee, then, before the Appropriations Committee, it's going to go to suspense, and then it's still moving. So we really have just a couple of days if we're able to kind of move forward, and assuming that that's the direction the board gives us, we would want to get, kind of feedback from them fairly quickly, because this bill was scheduled to go before appropriations next week. So it is kind of moving fairly quickly at this point. And actually, let me look that up. Let me just confirm the actual date. Yeah, it's set for a hearing on May 1st. So if we would have literally, I mean, just a couple of days, because actually let me see, sorry, I'm trying to do all this at once. So yeah, we would have Monday is the day. I mean, so ideally, if we were able to get this letter out today, we would want an answer by Friday, and certainly by Monday. If the measure is heard, then we know that it's, it's continuing to move, and we have our answer.
Would we not want to submit our concerns to the appropriations chair already? I mean, Monday's tomorrow.
It's here.
Yeah.
So I just, that's what I meant. I don't know that we have the time to not take a clear stance on what we think about this bill. It doesn't seem like there's room for a lot.
No, so I would say that, I mean, the senator, there's no reason why they have to hear the bill on Monday in appropriations. They could actually push off the hearing to the following week. So we could actually get a pretty clear indicator fairly quickly if, this letter resonates. And he's going to, kind of go along with what we're suggesting. So I do think that there is kind of an opportunity to actually have that engagement if we're able to move the letter and kind of hear fairly quickly where they are. And I think if I heard correctly, Frank had mentioned kind of with respect to a 2-year bill, I would think that if that is the case, then they actually wouldn't hear it in appropriations. But and kind of what we're looking for is the actual official word from that office, kind of as acknowledgement that this is in fact the case.
So would that letter indicate a request to pull off from appropriations at this time and asking for additional conversation on the item? Is that what we are looking for?
I think if we send a letter, I think if we don't want to take a opposed position now, and if we send a letter, I think we need to have an ask on that letter. And that ask should be that the bill be stopped. And then we'll know if it gets stopped or not.
And would that be a motion on your behalf?
Well, in an effort to just have more collaboration, that would be my motion. That we send a letter indicating our concerns as you've wrote it, but also with the firm request that the bill be slowed down to allow for more conversation.
Okay.
That's my motion.
I would agree with that. I would second that.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second.
Under discussion, Mr. President, just a quick question. So does that also then, would that include a caveat that if they don't do that, then we oppose? Will that be clearly stated?
I think we should. I think that given the fact that we don't have another meeting for us to get back to, we do have to have that off ramp. I think we do have to have.
So what I'm hearing is an intent to oppose if it's not stopped. To notify the author that we intend to oppose if it's not stopped.
Yes. That would be my motion.
Does a seconder agree?
I rescind my second.
Okay. What would you like to see, or what has changed that would make you rescind that?
Well, because I don't truly oppose the bill. There just needs to be more conversation. I just had recently heard a little bit of the murmurings, not murmurings, the little rumblings of this conservancy. And then all of a sudden it just pops up and now it's right here ready to be voted on. And there's concerns that my tribal council had regarding it and where it was going to and who would be involved in this board and just how it would, roll out and then how it would relate to the Salton Sea Authority. And so I agree that as Frank Reese, he had shared the projects and how would we oversee the projects and the Salton Sea Authority not having that capacity to do that. So that's a concern of mine also. I just don't see where it says that in the bill. So I oppose some of the verbiage in the bill, and I think that's where the language needs to be changed to suffice what my concerns are. And as for my tribal council, so that's why I rescinded the second.
So I think I'm Director. I'm Santillanes. I think I'm hearing you say all the reasons why you would at least why I would oppose the bill, because I'm looking for at least me. Reason I made the motion is I'm looking for an opportunity to have conversation.
Okay,
right?
Then I would
prior to the bill moving forward and becoming potentially law and establishing this conservancy. And so we're saying we want you to slow down the bill because we want to have these conversations. We want to weed out these concerns. And if you don't stop it and you carry it forward to the point where it could potentially go to vote and potentially become law, then you didn't allow for any of those conversations to happen.
Got it.
So therefore, if you don't allow for that, then I personally would oppose that.
Okay. Then I would second that. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have a motion, a second. Do you need any additional clarification?
I just think it's important to point out that, the presumption that the authority does not have the ability to implement project is a misunderstanding. The authority is the implementing agency on the North Lake Pilot Demonstration Project, and through our member agency, the Imperial County, Riverside County, our member agencies, to the extent there are discrete local projects, the authority is well capable of being the grantee overseeing the implementing agencies on the achievement of those objectives. As it relates to the shoreline in the seas, the state's responsibility under implementing the Salton Sea Management Plan and the Water Board order, the state is already obligated to do that. And there's no better body than these elected officials to press the state into funding and implementing that than any other body. And with the local stakeholders coming alongside of our effort and collaborating with it, it would just amplify our voice. As I mentioned, I think it'll take 3 years to stand up the Conservancy, and by then the 10-year plan will already be finished and the feasibility study will be done. So I think the timing is wrong. I think the conversation needs to happen, and I think that this is an opportunity to have that conversation.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. Mr. Cardenas is approaching the microphone. Go ahead, Director Cardenas.
Yes. So am I hearing that baked in to the letter is going to be an intent to oppose? We kind of determine what that language or what edits are being considered in this letter, because I do see an ask for a 2-year bill, but there was also a suggestion that we bake in intent to oppose.
I think that was the motion.
That was a motion, sir.
So the Director Cardenas, the motion I made was to make a request that the bill be slowed down, be stopped. And what that would mean, at least for me, is that it does not continue to go to the next committee, that it get pulled. I think that would show that that the request for a 2-year bill has been heard. And if our request is not granted, then we would have to take an unopposed position moving forward.
And that is without additional board action? Is that what you're thinking, Mr. Director Estrada, that if he does not stop the bill at the appropriation level, that would automatically unlock an opposed letter on behalf of this body, sir?
Yes, and I think we don't have a lot of time, and that's why we need to make that determination now. I think that you know, we are preparing ourselves for a number of potential outcomes. So one outcome could be our request is granted, bill is pulled, and automatically becomes a 2-year bill, or it goes to appropriations, continues to move, which I think at that point would indicate that our request has not been granted, at which point we would have to oppose the bill.
Sir, I have a statement.
I'm sorry, Mr. Cardenas?
I have a statement.
Go ahead.
Yes, and I just want to just share that we are in agreement with the comments that are being made today in regards to the positions that we've taken. But unfortunately, IID has taken a watch position on this bill. And so I personally would be conflicted voting on this matter because of the position that we have taken as an IID body, and will be abstaining from this vote, but in support of the letter, sending the letter that I put my signature and Reed signed on. But unfortunately, I will have to abstain from this vote due to the fact that IID has adopted the watch position on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Cardenas, and I expect Ms. Dockstader, you will probably take the same position.
That is correct.
Okay.
I support the watch, but yes, I will be abstaining.
Okay. Okay, so with that, Madam Clerk, will you go ahead and take a roll call vote?
Chairman Plancarte,
Yes?
Director Kelly, Vice Chair Santillanes,
Yes.
Director Tortes, Secretary Estrada,
Yes.
Director Aguilar,
Yes.
Treasurer Cardenas,
Abstain.
Director Dockstader,
Abstain.
Director Perez, Director Gutierrez. Motion passed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We've been up here for a while. We need to go ahead and take a quick bio break. Let's go ahead and reconvene at 5 minutes till 1 o'clock. 12:55 we'll reconvene. Okay, we are back. Thank you for your patience. We will now go on.
This meeting is being recorded.
We will go on to continuation of the agenda, but before that, I like to make sure that we still are maintaining a quorum, so I'm going to ask for a roll call.
Chairman Plancarte,
Here.
Director Kelly, Vice Chair Santillanes,
Here.
Director Tortes, Secretary Estrada, Director Aguilar,
Here.
Treasurer Cardenas, Director Dockstader,
Here.
Director Gutierrez. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We will now go to agenda item 4D, which is the proposed 2023-2024 budget for discussion and assessment of staff recommendations. Staff recommends that we approve the budget as presented, subject to each member finalizing ministerial, operational, and other actions for approval. Mr. O'Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. In your packet, you will find a memo from staff, me, and an associated budget for fiscal year 2023-2024. The foundation of this budget is our historical operating results, and I'm pleased to report that after 5 years, it's been 5 years since the authority reported an operating surplus, that this year we actually will show $53,000 in income in excess of expenses. Unfortunately, because of the historical deficits, we still are in a very tight cash pinch at the end of the year. The budget will reflect that at the bottom, and I'll explain that a little bit when we get to it. Built into the budget with the member contributions, which we approved last year at $200,000 per member agency. We did not increase that this year, so we included the same amount. Tribal contributions are voluntary, and last year they contributed $10,000. We show nothing in the budget. We record the revenue when it's paid, but we're advised that we can expect at least a $10,000 contribution for the coming year for the tribe. That is not in the current budget. We also have some revenues in there for federal, state, and local reimbursements and sponsorships. The federal, state, and local reimbursements would largely be associated with the feasibility study. It's a joint shared responsibility between us and the state of California to fund the local match for the federal feasibility study. It's a 50-50 match between us and the feds, and we have an indemnification between us and the state for costs associated with that, and I anticipate we'll have some costs, programmatic costs associated with that through the year that will get mostly staff time that'll be reimbursed from the state. The sponsorships, we did an aqua event this year, and we raised $5,500 in sponsorship with our new communications director coming on board, which we hope to have by the beginning of the fiscal year. It's budgeted that way. We're hopeful that we'll be able to have more participation from our various stakeholders in some of the things that we will sponsor. Grants and reimbursements we've got in there at $144,000. That's based principally on staff time that we believe is going to be allocated to those projects. Historically, we've used a percentage of revenue, but unfortunately, that's proven to be an ineffective way to account for the staff time that's being charged to the project. When the grants were originally provisioned, it was anticipated that we would receive 5% of the revenue for the grant that would flow through the authority for administrative expenses. What happens in actuality is we have to account for every hour spent based on a fully burdened rate, and then we get reimbursed 90% of that. The balance of that will come in at the end, and we're finding that that doesn't reconcile to the number that was budgeted, so we think that this is a more true number than we've used in the past. Stop me at any time. If not, I'm just going to move right on through the budget. Salaries and benefits, what we did is the salaries are based on actual salaries increased at review time based on Riverside County employment policy. Riverside County has a standard increment that they increase employees at every year, and that's built into the current 2 staff employees that we have. We did eliminate 1 staff position this year, and we did eliminate 1 contract position this year. We do have 1 new staff position, the public relations director, which is budgeted for the full year without any adjustment for annual increase, because we're expecting that position to be onboarded at or about the 1st of July. Our contract services, we have increments in there for, we don't know what these amounts are. I know they're online. I'm assuming they're going to be less. They may be more, but we budgeted 5% for our Sacramento and DC advocates. We budgeted a higher increment for our accounting and for our legal expenses because of our staff realignment. We expect we're going to need a little more accounting services for our grant administration responsibilities, and we expect that because of the feasibility study, our legal expenses are going to show some slight increase over the year. Other expenses we generally kept in the 10% range for office expenses and the like. Travel, we actually underperformed budget last year as far as what we were going to expend in travel at about $33,600 as opposed to $40,000 budget. But I did keep it the same as last year's budget at $40,000. I will remind the board that under the prior administration, that amount was budgeted at $100,000 a year, so I'm a very frugal traveler. The only other things that are reflected in the budget are the revenues that we anticipate receiving for grants. Those are in and out revenues. On the DWR, the North Lake feasibility study, we are budgeting about $2 million in revenue. We are being told by the contractor that's doing the work on the design, it's a $4 million contract with Dudek. We expect, he's informing us that we should expect 75% of that contract to be billed in the next fiscal year, which would be $3 million. But we budgeted $2 million this year, and we didn't want to overstate the revenues because remember last year it was tied to the authority reimbursement. So that was really part of the problem. We did have a higher income that we budgeted last year, but it was because we were expecting to receive an increment of $2 million in grant revenues that did not come in. The other revenues are associated with the North Lake Pilot. The North Lake Pilot. No, I'm sorry. The Desert Shores project of $725,000. That's a $1.25 million grant. We're hoping that we can complete substantially the lion's share of that work next year. And then there's the work that's allotted to us under a contract between us and the California Natural Resources Agency for communications, education, and outreach. And the monies that are reflected there are straight from the contract itself. And then the last number is just the money that moves over to the general fund. It does show on the bottom of the page, we're showing a slight negative balance of $19,750. That's what we're projecting right now. We intend to manage that to make sure that every vendor is paid and every dollar is collected, and expect that not to be a problem at the end of the year. But it is a very tight year, and wanted to make sure that this board was aware of our financial position coming off of 4 years of continued losses. We finally turned the corner. This is a very optimistic but responsible budget, I think. Not a lot of moving parts in this, not a lot to digest, but I welcome your question and I recommend it for your approval.
Thank you, sir.
I only have two little questions.
Little questions we can
Little
handle.
questions, super easy. Equipment was just $8,000, only because I'm a newbie. What kind of equipment do we have?
So our laptops are 7 to 10 years old, and I need to replace them. So that's just new laptops. And part of it is some of the equipment we use here in these meetings really causes us technical problems. So it's just a small amount, really $8,000 for some computers. Time to replace them.
And then my only other, again, small questions. So we pay an amount, the $2,400 to use this district board, but we don't pay to use Imperial Valleys?
We do not. That is an issue that we have discussed with Director Estrada, and it's a continuing conversation. They have to bring in outside services to run the IT. Unfortunately, they're not here right now, but we do pay for their services. So it's a small amount. We just needed to reflect it in the budget. If we could bury it somewhere, we would, but I think it's more transparent to just put it out there and say, here it is.
And for us in Imperial County, we do not, because staff has been trained to operate the system. And so they need little to no help from our staff. They just go in, they set up shop. The issues that have come up is incompatibility of some of the computers that they have. And, you know, it saddens me to see them carry in a desktop just so that they can see certain things a certain size. So they do need some upgrades. So. Yep. Do we have any additional questions?
None from me.
Thank you.
No, sir, I have no questions, and I would make the motion to approve the proposed 23-24 budget.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any directors still participating online that wish to chime in? So you're talking about technology? All right, we seem to have none, so with that, we'll take a roll call vote.
Chairman Plancarte,
Yes.
Director Kelly, Vice Chair Santillanes,
Yes.
Director Tortes, Secretary Estrada, Director Aguilar,
Yes.
Treasurer Cardenas, Director Dockstader,
Yes.
Director Gutierrez. Motion.
Since we all carry 2 votes.
Yes.
That's right.
Motion passes.
Yeah, Mr. President, if I could just comment for the new members, the way our bylaws are set up is that if it allows us to go forward with representatives from just 3 agencies. So right now we have a quorum under our bylaws, notwithstanding the fact that we only have 4 directors here out of the 10 that are authorized, because each of you at this point are exercising 2 votes, because you get to exercise both votes. So just
Both votes of the agency.
right, you
Of
get
your
to
agency.
exercise both votes of the agency. So that's why we've got a quorum, notwithstanding the fact that we've got less than half of the members.
You crossed my mind, sir.
Yep. That's one of the reasons also why we went ahead and did a roll call after the break, just to make sure that it was on the record that we were constituted. All right, we're going to go ahead and go to agenda item 4E, schedule for future board meetings. Mr. O'Dowd.
Mr. President, it has occurred that now 2 of our board members are on LAFCO, which have meeting times which are in conflict with our scheduled meetings. We are exploring, there are 3 meetings in the second half of the year that we are exploring with your staff to see whether your availability to move that to the 3rd week. And we will follow up on that. I wanted to make you aware of that. This particular facility will not be available in June and in August. And while we continue to keep the August date on the calendar, we're expecting to be dark in August. The June meeting, what we have done, we have reached out to the North Shore Yacht Club, and what we're wanting to do is schedule the June meeting as an evening meeting at 4 o'clock. June just so happens to be the 30th anniversary of the Salton Sea Authority. And what we would like to do is put together an evening meeting, invite the public, invite past board members, invite dignitaries, and have a small reception to commemorate that event. So that's our thinking right now, and if there's any thoughts or concerns about that, that's why we wanted to bring it up.
It's a method to your madness.
It's certainly madness.
Okay. So this item is more just information. Excellent.
Unless there was a problem.
Okay, going on to reports, federal, Lisa Moore, I know she stated she had provided her report. Going on to U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, Jeremy Brooks.
I believe he's on vacation this week.
Okay, going on to state reports, Horacio, I believe he's wrapped up. Mr. Hernandez, are you online? State of California.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm still here.
Good afternoon,
and
sir.
I have a good afternoon. Just have a brief update and on behalf of the Salton Sea Management Program. First, I would like to announce that the team has received or has acquired a new member of our team with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Her name is Samantha Perzaclasa. She's actually rejoining the Salton Sea team. She left for a little bit, but she's back with us to continue to work with the Salton Sea Management Program as the avian biologist working out of the Bermuda Dunes office. Also, I'd like to extend a thank you for everybody that participated on last week's community meeting. That was a very informative meeting regarding the 2023 annual report. The recording is still making its way to our Salton Sea website, but it should be up in the coming days. Also, well, that meeting was in preparation for an upcoming meeting by the water boards, which, by the way, that's going to happen on May 16 and 17. That's going to be the annual Salton Sea Water Board workshop. We will be expanding a lot more in detail regarding the 2023 annual report. And also, it was recently announced just yesterday, a new date for public scoping meeting now with our partners with the federal, the Army Corps of Engineers, Salton Sea Authority, and the Salton Sea management team are putting together this public scoping meeting to initiate this new process with the federal government. So I invite you all to participate and definitely look forward for other future opportunities for engagement. Happy to answer any questions, if any.
Do you have a date yet for that scoping meeting?
Yeah, that's going to be on May 18th. There's no time just yet, but it's going to be 2 meetings that same day.
Thank you. Please keep us informed. Okay, going on to item B2, that was B2. B3, Salton Sea Recreation Area Update. Mr. Quarantari, are you online?
Mr. Chairman, he was not able to join the meeting, but we will be posting his report online.
Okay, that will be available online. Going on to local reports, Salton Sea Action Committee. Mr. Pace, are you online?
I didn't see him.
Okay, going on to Executive Director's Report. Mr. O'Dowd.
In the interest of time, Mr. President, I will be brief. The question was raised with respect to project updates, and I appreciate the interest. I had hoped to have more information on the Desert Shores project today, but what I can share is that I've been working very closely with Mr. John Gay at Imperial County. He's been extremely helpful. He is going to add life and vigor to the implementation of this project. Right now, what we are working on is the geotechnical work and developing a budget for services which are frankly going to cost more than we had originally anticipated. He has a preliminary estimate, but we don't have a firm contract for that. And once we have that information, we learned recently that IID owns lots along the shoreline that might be available for well sites. We had been looking for well sites for a long time. And if we can work with our friends at IID to secure some of that property for that purpose, that will be extremely helpful. And so as far as updates for the board, when I am finally able to secure and seat my new public relations director, my intention is to update the website and have a dynamic website that will include all of the projects, not just Salton Sea Authority projects, but SSMP projects, so that it can be a central source for people who are interested in a project or its status. We will have a more formal presentation on the Desert Shores project next month. It'll be on the agenda, and both Mr. Gay and myself should be making that presentation. I expect we will. And then the following month, when we're at the Yacht Club, I intend to do a more formal presentation on an update for the North Shore Pilot Demonstration Project. And that concludes my remarks. I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Do we have any questions for Mr. O'Dowd?
No.
Okay, being none and being no additional items on the agenda, this meeting is adjourned.